Welcome to Growthology. I am your host, Carlos Hidalgo, and today I am pleased to be joined by my longtime friend and someone I learn from almost every time we interact with, Dave Brock. Welcome to Growthology. Thrilled to have you.
Well, thanks so much, Carlos. It's really a privilege to be on this. And, I want to say right back at you, I enjoy our conversations and learn so much from them. And also it's always such a great opportunity to talk.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I was thrilled you said yes. We have had many conversations, most of them just impromptu. We'll call each other. And then I know recently I sent you a very long email and just a rant, really, because I was like, I'm so just irritated. Who would appreciate that? I'm like, my friend Dave. So I shot you an email and you responded back like, I think you're completely wrong. You just need to get used to this. And I'll be honest, you had me for like 3 seconds where I was like, oh my word, he's succumbed to the madness. But thankfully you were joking.
Yeah, you read past the first paragraph, and then I jumped on the bandwagon with you and started whining about how bad things are.
Yeah, it's a little nuts. I feel like we've been talking about many of the same things for a very long time, but I do see glimmers of hope. I have been talking to a lot of CMOs, a lot of growth facing leaders who are starting to understand the importance of being systematic, being pragmatic. And that for me is really exciting because, my entire career, literally the last 30 years have been spent in this space. So I'm excited to start to see some progression and move forward. And hopefully that brings some of the lagging brands up to speed very quickly as well. So before we get into everything growth facing, one question we always like to ask is if you were not in B2B or in the corporate world doing what you're doing, what would you be doing?
Geez, I don't know. Is the other day I got involved in a conversation that turned into a series of blog posts and back and forth on selling, and I wrote a post saying I'm obsessed with selling. I can't think of anything more fun, and I tell people I wake up and do my hobby every day with wickedly smart people with very, very difficult problems, and they pay me exorbitant fees. So what could be better? And also, I almost can't imagine what I'd do if I weren't in B2B sales. But probably I've had some startups stuff. And I have a lot of ideas for some startups, particularly around software. And so I might try and do a startup if any VC would fund me or things like that, or teach. So it would probably be one of those two things.
All right. Yeah, I'm with you. I love selling. And I know people who it kills them to sell. They hate it. And I always kind of get into, well, let's define what selling is, because I think they have this idea of a used car salesman. No offense to used car salesmen who may be listening, but this volume play of got to pound the phones. I've got to kind of force you into listening to my pitch and buying my product. And I'm like, no, that's not what I mean at all. And I think the thing I enjoy about it the most is really getting to help customers understand what their core needs are and then how to address that. And if they buy my services in the process, that's just the icing on the cake.
Yeah, well, I think part of what causes me to be so interested in it is I'm intensely curious, and I'm always trying to figure things out. So whether it's how do I figure out how to reach out to these individuals or this company that probably don't want to talk to somebody like me. And so how do you figure out how to do that? And then, as I said, my clients and the people I work with are some of the smartest in the world dealing with really, really difficult problems and trying to figure out how to, move forward, how to grow, how to overcome those problems. So it's kind of the problem solving piece of that. And to do that with other people is just so much fun. So that's what I love about B2B selling is I'd probably be terrible as a used car salesperson. I'd be terrible as a transactional type salesperson, um, because that doesn't provide the challenge that I look for. But, fortunately, there's so much tough stuff going on in selling right now. You get involved with all sorts of really cool things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's actually fun. I really it's
Yeah.
it's the one part of my job that I love the most. And I would do more of it. So if you weren't doing this, you'd be doing this, is what I just heard.
Well, that's exactly it. And what you do is you get your teeth kicked in every once in a while, and you pick yourself up and you say, okay, what do I do different?
Yeah,
How do I go back after this, and so on. So, and again, I couldn't imagine anything more fun.
I love it. Well, it should for any I'm sure you've been told this before, and for anybody listening who's not watching, it comes through in just how you interact with people. And I've been around you quite a bit. I think we go back almost 15 years. And it just comes through that you love what you do. And I think most people would be envious of that position.
Yeah, yeah.
So you describe yourself as a ruthless pragmatist.
Uh-huh.
Give me more on that. Give us
So
more. What do you mean by that?
well, part of it goes back to the problem solving and figuring things out, not to, to say there has to be a way to address this issue. There has to be a way to make this work. And also you try and figure things out. And, there's a lot of, and I read all the books, I look at all the theories. I mean, by training, I'm a theoretical physicist. So, I should be interested in all this kind of theoretical aspect.
Mhm.
But in growing up in sales and in leading larger companies, is you figure out what works and you are very pragmatic. It's never perfect. You can never apply the methodologies, the processes perfectly, but you kind of figure it out and you really focus on what it takes to produce the outcomes that you want to produce with your customers, the outcomes you want to produce with your organization. Then you have to be very pragmatic about it, not idealistic about it or not theoretical about it.
So what does that process look if you're a growth facing professional, you're in an organization, you know, so many people have different ideas. I read a post today which I liked by my buddy Pete Duran, who said,
Mhm.
instead of talking about, that basically there was a mistake or there was an issue, and instead of, well, we can't do this, it's how can we fix this?
Yeah.
That's not often a phrase you hear, unfortunately, in corporate America. But if you're that pragmatic, how does that work in large groups, such as a marketing department or a sales team, where everybody kind of wants to try the latest new thing, try the newest methodology, slap a new name on something that's old? It seems like the only constant is change. How can you stay rooted in pragmatism at that point?
I think I think you have to be very focused on what you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to achieve it with, and be very focused on the realities that you and say the customer face, and say, how do we work within those constraints? Everything around us, and again, I'll go revert to the theoretical physicist part of my background, is everything around us is rooted in constraints. So now we start looking at how do I work within those constraints? And I think the neat thing about selling is every once in a while you can venture outside those constraints. You can start innovating and thinking about things differently and all. But I think as long as you're very clear and very focused on what you're trying to achieve and you never lose the vision for that, and you always try and achieve it in the most effective way that you can, and then later the most efficient way you can do that. Um, and then you keep focusing on how do I do more? How do I do more? How do I grow? How do I think differently about those? And that's really kind of what I call the pragmatic piece of this, it's not kind of looking for the easy answers, because in our businesses, there are no easy answers. And it's not looking for the magical solutions or the tricks or gimmicks and all, because those are very rarely sustainable. It's how do I just consistently keep producing results in the very best way that we can.
I love that answer. And you mentioned within that answer, you mentioned the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Something you and I have talked a lot about is so many organizations do not have a clear picture of who their customers are. And when I say clear picture, they may say, hey, we sell to enterprise companies, but down to the individual level or the committee that's involved with that decision, they really know nothing about them. And especially what I've seen from salespeople, they're trained to talk about their product. They're given the value prop, they're given the 5 key points, the 3 pieces of ROI, and it's very robotic. So how do you approach that with your clients, where you say, hey, let's draw back a little bit and frame the discussion from a customer perspective, because revenue is an outcome. It shouldn't be a goal. The goal should be helping your customer make the most informed decision possible.
Yeah. And frankly, the traditional way we sell, this product focused selling, and, me reaching out through an email or through LinkedIn or something like that and say, I have the coolest product in the world. Are you interested in talking to me? That's tough work to get somebody to respond to you, find the right people, take them through. And I guess I'm too lazy to do that work. And what we've found, and the data has been stunning around this, we have this concept we call business focused selling. And so one is, and this is something you and I have talked about before, is we focus viciously on our ICP, on the sweet spot. I kind of think of one of these targets, and we focus on the bullseye, and we try not to venture outside the bullseye, because we know these people are likely to have the problems that we're the best in the world at solving. And so my probability of engaging them in a conversation, interesting them, and moving forward is really good. So we focus really on our ICP. But then when we start engaging them, we do something very different, and we train our clients to do something very different, which is not talk about the product, even if the customer asks you about the product. Is what we're talking about is the customer's business problem. What are they trying to do? Why are they trying to do it? What happens if they don't solve it? What questions should they be asking themselves? What should they be looking at? Who should they be involving in this whole thing? And we're helping them learn about the issues, the problem, what they'd like to achieve, and so on. And at some point in that process, they say, how can you help us?
Mm-hmm.
And that transforms. And the data that we see from this, we've been implementing this with a number of large companies around the world. The data we see, as you would expect, win rates skyrocket. They at least double. And that's because you're building this platform of trust and confidence, and you're building that relationship and so on. Number 2 is no decisions made go down by, right now we're seeing 30%. We see probably going down by about 50, 60%.
Wow.
And we know from the data that, Matt and Ted have done, is that no decision made accounts for about over 60% of the opportunities we're chasing after. So if we can make a dent in that, it drives revenue up. And for some people, what's most counterintuitive is buying cycles are reduced by 30 to 40%. And the reason is you go back to, you and I are familiar with the old Gartner spaghetti diagram about how customers wander all over the place. They start and stop, shift directions, and so on. What we're doing is we're guiding them through their buying process in a very effective and efficient way. So rather than wandering and starting and stopping, we help them navigate it very effectively and efficiently. So, I look at that and say, if I'm involved in something where my win rates are double the traditional way, my no decisions made reduce, and my sales cycle reduce, that's lazy selling.
Yeah.
And I'd much rather do that because I get much more done in less time. And plus I build these relationships. So if I'm looking at retention or expansion or all those sorts of things, I've laid the groundwork for that.
Well, and to me, one of the biggest things you mentioned in that, and I appreciate you drawing that out and sharing the data because I think it's so important, is the word trust.
Yep.
And I think, yes, trust helps me improve in all the areas that you mentioned. Where my mind goes is eventually in any relationship, whether it's interpersonal or company to company, there's going to come a point in time, either with your software or your service, where you hit a bump in the road. Something goes wrong, a system goes down, someone makes a mistake. And what I have found is when you have that foundation of trust where your customer knows I have your best interest in mind, most of the times those bumps are literally just mere bumps where you can talk about it, you move on, you keep going. It's when trust isn't built, those little molehills become mountains. And that's
right.
A big difference for me.
Right. The other thing we're talking about, which we've really lost, is B2B selling is about people and human beings. And we've seen so much of what I'll call the mechanization and dehumanization of the process is customers become widgets that are on our sales assembly lines. Sellers become replaceable widgets that if they don't perform, we'll swap them out with somebody else. And we've lost kind of the humanity of it. And again, you start looking at all the data, whether it's attrition and turnover in our own organizations, engagement, if you look at customer satisfaction and those kinds of things, it's all deeply human types of issues. And we've drifted away from that. And the more we start embracing it, the more we build that trust and the more we actually accomplish together.
100%. And we've made it so mechanical that you now have organizations, instead of talking about the purchase cycle or the customer cycle, they're talking about their funnel. They're their marketing campaigns up to top of funnel, middle funnel, end of funnel. If it was that linear, it'd be really easy. Yeah. And at the same time, you do have this human on the other side who's wondering, what happens if I make the wrong choice? Am I making the right choice with this vendor? I'm about to plunk down 6 figures for this software. All of those human emotions play into it, not to mention that they just might have had a bad day getting ready in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? A fight with the spouse, something with the kids. I love that you've brought that out because I think the more we dehumanize when we talk about accounts or leads or contacts instead of people, it just makes our jobs harder.
It does, because people want to be connected with people. Yes. And they want to know that, I'm on a lot of these things and people say, what are the 2 top skills you look for in a salesperson? And I say, I look for 2 things: curiosity, really intense curiosity, because I know I can't teach them everything. So I want them to be curious enough to figure it out. Then number 2 is I want them to care.
Yeah.
If I have those 2 characteristics in a seller, I can train them on everything and coach them on everything else. But if they don't have those characteristics, they're going to struggle. And again, we can't give our sellers all the answers in complex B2B selling. They have to we give them kind of the frameworks and the tools to help them get to the answers as quickly as possible. But they have to figure things out, and they have to have that, and customers are figuring out the answers too. So they have to have the ability to help customers figure things out for themselves. Right. And they have to care deeply about it, because I'll go back to revenue, is we don't get revenue until the customer has decided how to solve their problem. Right. And they've decided to do it with us. So if we treat revenue as our objective, we miss where the customer's at. And, if we help them be successful, then what we do is we get the revenue that we get. And I think we get that backwards. We make it overcomplicated. And that's why we struggle so much in so many of our sales organizations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're exactly right. We do get it backwards. So let's shift now. It's kind of adjacent to talk about AI, which I've used your phrase many, many times of AI just means we get to produce mediocrity at scale. Um, is it you? And you wrote a great article yesterday, at least our yesterday. When this airs, it won't be yesterday, but about AI in the sales process, and is it helping? Is it hurting? I would love your take on that. And I mean, I have a lot of opinions, but I'm not the guest on the show, so I'll let you go first.
Well, I use AI tools every day. Chat GPT has become my best friend. It's become my debate partner. Because I go to it with ideas and say, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where give me ideas about how I might think about this differently. So it's a debate partner. So I think there's huge promise in AI. I think one of the things as we look at AI, it's relatively young, even though it's been around, and the large language models are relatively young. They're a little over a year old or so, at least in terms of public consumption. And whenever we go through big technologies like this, we always screw up. We do the most stupid things first. We learn and we apply it, and so on. And so we see that right now. We're doing a lot of stupid things. I think the big thing that I see we're leveraging AI not as effectively as we can is too many people are using AI to give them the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's write a prospecting email for me. Do the research and help me script this presentation. And also they're looking for the answers. Where I've seen the best use of AI is help me figure out what the answers are, because AI doesn't have the specific situation, the specific context, the individual or groups that I'm talking to, and they can't do that. But AI can help me think about that meeting I'm going into. I have all these things going on. What are some of the things I should be thinking about to drive that meeting as effectively as possible? And where I see the best uses of AI are people using it to help them figure something out, to help, whether it's their debate partner, but to help them figure it out, not to give them the answers. And when you look at in other disciplines, what I see is the people who are using AI the best, and what I see in selling, the people who are using AI the best are usually the top performers.
Right.
Because they aren't using it for the answers, but they're using it to help them figure things out. And so you look at AI in the medical profession, and highly trained, highly experienced and skilled people, not to give them the answers, but to help them see things that they might not have seen before, but then to figure out what to do. I look at it in manufacturing and other areas, and you see how it takes, really smart people to say, aha, here's the things that AI is giving me. Here's how I might think about things differently. So I see that as a challenge, but I see that as the opportunity. Is once we start breaking that code and using AI properly, and as AI evolves, the power it will give us in terms of really intersecting the customers with relevant stuff is really interesting. The other thing that I see, and it seems so silly, I got into a debate or a presentation to a client a few weeks ago. I said, do you realize your customers are using AI to figure you out? Mm-hmm. And they couldn't be using it. We're salespeople. We're advanced with all this stuff. And I said, well, it was a vendor of a huge sales enablement platform. And I said, well, I went in and pretended I was a buyer, and here's the analysis it gave me about you and your competition in my needs and which product I should go to. And he said, oh my God, I didn't realize our customers were using these tools to look at us. And I said, we're kind of arrogant in that perspective. We don't think of how our customers are using these tools.
You're exactly right. It brings something to mind. I've had conversations. We fall in love with our lead scoring models, our account scoring, our qualification ranges, and we forget that as much as we're qualifying potential customers, they're qualifying us as vendors.
Absolutely.
At every stage, starting with brand all the way through to after they become a customer, which is why I think, in addition to trust, experience is so important. And I see people say, we're no longer in this economy, we're in this economy. I think we're in the trust and experience economy. And I think AI has a potential to erode that trust if, to your point, it's not used properly.
Yeah, and I think that's a particularly important thing to highlight, because right now we see so much kind of in society in general, but in business, we see so much polarization. We see so much isolation. We see so much disengagement and lack of trust. Is that the thing that we're all searching for, is that trust, that engagement. And again, we go back to the humanity of this, that somebody understands me and what I'm trying to achieve, and they care for me. And those things are all so fundamental to what we do. And I see us, the pendulum swung so far one direction to the dehumanization, and we've seen so much breakdown, and it's slowly swinging back to the human part. So I'm really optimistic about where we're going and the potential in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm optimistic about AI helping us do that better. Not displacing us from doing it, but helping us do that better.
I sure hope so. I've seen some good applications of it. Yeah. Much like you, I've seen horrendous uses of it. And somebody, I can't remember who, posted, I think we're starting to, if you're in this world, starting to sniff out pretty quickly. This was just lazy AI generated. You did no humanization of it. You just literally cut and paste whatever ChatGPT spit out and sent it to me. This is just lazy. And honestly, for me, at that point, I probably would never engage that brand again because of that one experience. And that may be harsh, but I don't think I'm alone.
No, I think all of us feel that way. And I'm starting to look at like my LinkedIn feeds and all, is, a ChatGPT generated article in there just pops out at you. I mean, it's too well written and too mediocre to have been done by a human being. Right. So it just reaches out, and I just turn it off. I'm not interested. I mean, I'm not going to learn anything from this conversation, or follow this thing. But we see too many people, when, people look at this volume and velocity type stuff, they take the easy ways out and, paper LinkedIn or paper our inboxes with a lot of stuff that is artificial.
But how much of that is being driven by executives who fail sometimes to understand, especially with a more strategic sale? This stuff does not happen overnight. Marketing cannot create qualified accounts or leads overnight. Customers are taking longer to make decisions, involving more people in that buying process. Yet the pressure is, you've got to meet your quarterly quota and no pipeline to work from. So yeah. Not only do you have to go out and harvest your prospective accounts, and it takes time to build trust and build those human connections, but boy, if I don't have that pipeline at 3x, and if I'm not closing to meet quota, I'm next out the door. So where does that all play in enabling salespeople to sell the right way versus this dehumanized, chopped up way that we see so often?
Well, I mean, you cover a huge amount there, and I'll just kind of attack bits and pieces
Sure.
of. One is in this dehumanized mechanistic process. What we've seen is we've seen things like win rates plummet. You know, right now, average win rates are 15 to 20%. We've seen sales cycles expand. We've seen no decisions made skyrocket. We've seen customers saying, I want a rep-free buying experience, even though we know that they're likely not to be happy, be confident with the decision they've made. So we've created this and we've trained our customers to behave this way. And all the data is going in the wrong direction. If we just step back and start transforming this back to problem solving and human to human type things, we also see the data changing very much in our favor. And that the data I cited earlier about higher win rates, lower no decision made, reduced selling cycles, where we actually find customers that want to talk to us and engage us. So we've lost our way with this mechanistic kind of thing. But when you see people doing this business focused approach, you see such tremendous results. And it does go back, I think, to a leadership issue. Is that our people do what we train them to do, what we coach them to do, what we measure them on doing, and we're just training them and coaching them on the wrong things. And again, I think I see the pendulum swinging the other direction because you see so much is just broken down. And not working. And so people are trying to figure things out. And the answers are really sitting there in front of us. It does take a lot of courage to put that up. But then you start seeing your ability to produce results is actually pretty fast. I work with clients and, I ask them that, they have win rates of 15 to 20%. I'd say in 3 months, we can get your win rates up to over 50%.
Right.
And they say, well, how do you do that? And I said, better disqualification, better focus on the right ICP and so on and so forth. Get the people that are really the right customers for you. Focus on that. But right now, with the volume velocity things, we're casting such wide nets, we're defeating ourselves. So you can start turning around the results pretty quickly. And the customers are hungry. They want to move more quickly. But our selling approach actually slows them down because we force them to do things other than work with us.
Well, you hit on something that just gave me some PTSD of all the administrative and process-driven tasks that salespeople have to do. And it takes away from their time. It takes away from their effectiveness. Give them the opportunity to go and do what they do best, which is sell, and equip them and enable them. And I love your two, curiosity and caring, your two things. Like, give them that opportunity to go out and do it right, so they can go create more revenue for the company and take better care of a customer. I'm curious, with your data, when done the way that you prescribe and teach and model for your clients, have you seen any kind of impact on what that does to retention rates and customer lifetime value?
Oh, we've seen tremendous things. I'm trying to think what I can talk about. So we've seen a number of different things. One is we see an increase in average deal size, because what you start doing is you start building this trust and this collaborative problem solving process thing. Is customers invite you into different kinds of opportunities. So we had one client where we did some restructuring about how they sold and reorganization of their customer sets, where they went from average deal values of $10,000 to within 9 months, $190,000. And 3 years later, they're $1.5 million. They went from win rates, they were pretty good. They had win rates of about 55%. Now their win rates are about 82%. So you see just those things. They are just now starting to see some reduction in sales cycles, but I mean, we've had such a huge improvement in productivity. And what's interesting is they're starting to establish kind of these closer alliances because people see that they're driven after the interests of the customers. They're being asked into other kinds of deals. They're being treated as more partners than vendors. Mm-hmm. So we see some of that. And so that will lead you into higher retention, higher renewal, and those kinds of things. The other thing that we see with that, and I hadn't mentioned it before, and if you go back to some of the sessions that you and I sat in with CEB and Gartner and so on, is you start looking at what drives customer retention and what drives customer growth, say in major accounts. And you go back to think, why did the customer buy us in the first place? They bought us because we changed the status quo. We got them to innovate and do things differently. But the problem is when we become their incumbent vendor, is we defend the status quo. We become part of the problem, and our competitors are coming in to change the status quo. And also, we have to continually think of how do we help our customers innovate? How do we help them grow and change? How do we help them continue to change that status quo and those kinds of things? So we have to, I think, adopt our strategies and not change from, being a challenger to the status quo to the defender of the status quo. We have to say, how do we constantly help our customers challenge their status quo and grow, use our current products better and more effectively, and use additional products that we sell better and more effectively, and keep helping them innovate through the life cycle of what they do.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out. I also think, and I'm curious what you think of this, is you've got to understand when to push them towards that innovation. I see a lot of brands as they get a customer and then instantly it's, well, now we got to start our customer marketing, and it's upsell and cross sell and this. And I was in a meeting not long ago with a partner where the partner salesperson, and you could just feel all the momentum go out of the room. Mm-hmm. We started talking about more products and what they could do. And I was in that situation. I couldn't really interject at that point. But I think is there not a timing to that of let's get, yes, you bought your first product, your first solution, you've made your first purchase. Let's get you comfortable with where you're at before we start pushing and driving. And then what's the implication if I start driving that conversation too soon?
Well, I mean, you confuse the customer. And I mean, they're there to produce results. And also we have to go through and help them realize the value that we committed to them in that, and then help them move forward. And then you have to kind of look at saying, when should they be moving forward? For some period of time, that improvement may be great for them, but when are they falling behind? When might they start thinking of things differently? And so this requires us to have really deep understanding of industries and markets. Mm-hmm. To see what are the big trends. If and we know this with people too, when we're managing them, if we're continually pummeling them with change initiatives and so on, they just get exhausted and worn out. And they tend to kind of hunker down and go into self-preservation mode. So it's things like, how do you get them focused on the one or two things that really drive huge performance increases? Mm-hmm. Get them to master that, and then say, what's next and what are the one or two things beyond that. And so sometimes with these customer and complex solutions, it takes years to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yeah.
have to be committed to that long-term potential.
Well, and again, there's that patience game, which you don't see often, especially from leaders. And I get it. You know, you have your numbers to hit, but especially for an organization who's saying we want to make this shift, there are some things, as you pointed out, that you can do immediately to start to change that. But there's also that change management for your customers and for your teams of, we're going to start to operate a little bit differently. We're not going to just throw everything into this make-believe funnel and pretend it's a lead and get salespeople chasing unqualified stuff. We're going to start to care about our customers and help them make the most informed choices possible.
Yeah.
That's a big shift, and it does take years. I think, you know, anything culture-wise to change takes a good 2 to 3 years to really become permanent.
Absolutely. And this morning I was on a call with a very good friend. He runs a very successful consulting company headquartered in London. And he was talking about a particular client that they had where they were having really difficult times. And the problem is the management of the sales management of that client had become fascinated with what I call the program du jour. Is that, you know, they had brought my friend and his company in to drive a big change initiative, and all of a sudden leadership got bored with that and found another change initiative and another change initiative and the other change initiative. And what was happening is the people were getting overwhelmed.
Yep.
They didn't know where to focus their time. So what happened was this program that my friend was putting in place had been producing tremendous results, but all of a sudden people got confused because they were diverted to other things and other things and other things. And people were just survival mode. They were just hunkering down and trying to say, well, this too will pass because tomorrow there'll be another program du jour. So I can ignore yesterday's ones and the day before yesterday's ones and just kind of wait this thing out. And so I think sometimes we tend to be too fashionable and too cool and too with it that we don't recognize that we're overwhelming people. And that they won't make the change that they should. So when I work with our clients, is usually we talk about a couple of things of what are the top 2 priorities, and let's focus on those,
right,
until we get to the next ones. And the other thing I do is when you start doing those top 2 priorities, what are the top 3 things they're going to stop doing?
Right. Yeah, I think that's just as important. Is you got to stop doing some certain things. And to your point, there's only 2 to 3 things you can really excel at one time. Other than that, I call it purposely letting them fall through the cracks.
Yeah. And what happens is we just keep piling on and piling on. And so pretty soon we have all this overhead. And, you know, I'm coaching a salesperson for one of my clients, and we were on a call yesterday, and he was talking about some simple things of just updating CRM and Tableau and so on and so forth. And I said, well, take me through what you're doing with this. And he was doing lots of bad habits based on legacies of things that he hadn't stopped doing things, but he was doing years and years worth of stuff. And then adding the new stuff and adding the new stuff and adding the new stuff. And I said, you're making it far too complicated for yourself. You don't have to do all this stuff. And he said, I've always done that. And I just said, stop it.
Like that.
You're making it too hard for you.
Right. It's like that Bob Newhart Saturday Night Live sketch where he was the counselor. Just stop it. Just stop it. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think that's great advice. Dave, as always, fascinating conversation. I always learn something, as I said. I know our listeners have. Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. I look forward to when we get to meet in person again. Hopefully, Brent will assemble the ragtag bunch that he calls his friends in some place for a couple of days this summer. We can get together in person. But thank you so much for being part of Growthology. I really, really
Well,
appreciate it.
thanks for inviting me. I just love these conversations, and having this conversation with you, couldn't think of any better way to spend my time and something more fun than this. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll have you back on in following seasons. Thank you to all who are listening to Growthology. We again want to thank Dave Brock. We'll have his contact details and a link to his book in the show notes. And we hope that you all in your growth facing roles make it all about your customer and take some advice from Dave. Figure out what to stop doing so you can focus on the things that matter. Have a great day.